Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalk webinar series featuring Steve Joordens, a full professor and director of advanced learning technologies at lab at University of Toronto. Our EdTalk facilitator today is John Wanamaker, Executive Director of Campus Consortium. As mentioned before, we will take the questions at the end of today's presentation. Please enter your questions in the chat box or the questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. Now, without further ado, please allow me to present to you Mr. Wanamaker and Mr. Joordens. Over to you, John.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. This is John Wanamaker, Executive Director of Campus Consortium. I would like to thank each one of you for joining us today for the EdTalk series webinar supporting student success in a skills-based world. Thoughts on the optimal EdTech ecosystem. I am certain that this will be an engaging and informative session and hope that you all will see how an optimal EdTech ecosystem can support student success through formal development and of transferable skills. I want to start by giving you all an overview of the Campus Consortium. We are a global non-profit organization founded about 16 years ago. Our association has thousands of members across the globe. The consortium's mission is to help members reduce the time, cost, and effort associated with implementing enterprise IT services by leveraging shared IT services, lessons learned, and best practices so that each member can avoid reinventing the wheel when adopting new educational technologies for their institution. The next slide, I want to call out a special thanks to our sponsors. And before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that these companies are working with us to help support this broadcast and the other EdTechs that we run on a regular basis, where we're featuring some of the most up-to-date and relevant tech topics and trends in higher ed that are impacting campuses across the globe today. We are also supported by our sponsors with publications that we do. We do a series of white papers, case studies, success stories, etc. All of these would not have been possible without the support of our sponsors such as Unified, Quick Launch, Oracle, Black Belt Help, and Salesforce. On the next slide, I just want to call out some of the current Open Campus Consortium grants. We're a nonprofit organization. We work with the aim to help institutions implement the latest technologies on their campus. The consortium is running a series of technology grants throughout the year. Here's a current list of grants we are running now that are open and designed to provide you with a variety of solutions and products and services at a reduced cost. We encourage you to check out campusconsortium.org, where you can learn more about the grants listed here. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Steve Joordens, who is not only very active in a variety of academic roles, but Professor Joordens is also a consumer, producer, and researcher of educational technologies. He has been a key member of the university's Transformative Teaching and Learning Committee that is defining a strategy for innovation, which includes a deep consideration of the role that technology may play and considered approaches to the procurement and the support these technologies require to maximize their impact on student success. These experiences have led Professor Joordens to a clearly defined notion of the optimal university-based ecosystem needed to transform university culture in a way that maximizes student success. In this webinar, he will present his perspective in a way meant to provoke thought and discussion at what he views as a critical moment for universities and colleges the world over. Very excited to have Steve Joordens joining us today, and now we're going to turn over the presentation for Steve. Thanks again, Steve, for being a part of the EdTech series and for presenting with us today.
Thank you very much, John. Fantastic. Just get this all set to go here. Alrighty. So, thank you all very much for coming out today. I really appreciate it. I hope we have some fun. Again, this is meant to be a bit of a provocative talk, although I'm not going to try to be, too controversial. However, I am entering, I understand, a world where that's more many of you guys' world than my world, and giving my thoughts on it. So I'm hoping that kind of gets us all thinking. First of all, here's the basic roadmap of where we're going today. I want to give you a very quick sense of who I am, my take on the current educational kind of context and climate. I'm going to use one specific educational technology, one that I'm associated with. It's come out of our lab. It's something called PureScholar, just to give a concrete example. So when we talk through, you have a sense it's not just a whole abstract talk. And then we'll get to the real meat of the webinar, which is some of these thoughts and ideas I have about, not necessarily changes. In some cases, this may be how people are already doing things, but a whole sort of constellation of things that I think could work together to create a really good ecosystem. So as I hit each of these sort of topics, there'll be a little slide like this to tell you we're going on to the next one. And so for the first one, I just wanted to give you a sense of who I am. And John's already touched on that a little bit, but just to give you a sense, I am a professor, and in my class, I'm a heavy user of educational technologies. So I use 7 different educational technologies in my introductory to psychology class. That's in part because it's a large class and I'm trying to find interesting ways to engage the class while I lecture and to use assessments as learning tools and those sorts of things. So I'm a heavy consumer. I also am a researcher of educational technologies, trying to build them in some cases or assess them, typically for efficacy and usability. But it's probably the next 2 roles that are more relevant to this talk. And the first one is, I'm lucky to be at a great campus, University of Toronto. I'm actually at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and I am every now and then part of committees and such that consider the EdTech ecosystem we want to create and the teaching and learning environment we want to create. And so a lot of what I say will, from the institutional side, will come from those experiences. But then I'm also on the other side. I am also part of a startup called Cognito that backs PureScholar. And so I also have the sort of vendor perspective on the ecosystem, I guess. And so that's going to come into play as well. And let me just, before I leave this slide, mention we've got a fantastic group of people here today. I was lucky enough to see some of the registrants and their roles, and we really have the gamut from IT kind of people in campus to professors to administrators and decision makers. And so I think the ecosystem is here, so to speak, and there are probably other perspectives that I don't have, and I really hope we can kind of leverage that and have fun together as we talk through this. I will also be keeping an eye on the chat and such, and while I won't promise to answer every question in the flow of things, if there are things that I think are important to address, I will do so. Okay, so that said, the current educational context, I think this is really important because I really do think we're in a time of transition. I was, if we kind of look at this is just a graphic, an infographic here about EdTech and where things are, and I like to say you are here in this last phase. Where is here? Well, here is a world where we've now got our learning management systems in place, and we're trying to use them now to up our pedagogical game. And what does that mean, up our pedagogical game? Well, in the current climate, a lot of that has to do with giving our students the skills they need to succeed in a world where careers are very undefined, where careers are constantly changing thanks to automation, thanks to innovation, and therefore students, it's hard to know what they will be doing. And therefore the position that a lot of educators have taken is the best thing we can do for our students is teach them skills like critical thinking and creative thinking and communication, because those transferable skills will help them to be successful in a wide range of contexts. And so that's kind of the educational context. We're just post LMS, and this, and really trying to think pedagogy and how can we use our LMSs to really effectively enhance the pedagogy. I want to kind of just stress this a little bit. I was impressed that universities were ultimately able to make LMS as part of our ecosystem. There is, of course, this notion called academic freedom, and this idea that you cannot tell anybody, any instructor, what they should do in their class, and of course, we all respect that. And so when LMSs came out and universities were kind of saying, thou shalt use this LMS, I wasn't sure how that would play out, and I'm very glad to say that it's played out positively. They are now, a core part of virtually every university now, and I see that as a major success for educational technologies, because we really need the LMSs as a starting place. And so I think we have that starting place well in place. And now the question is kind of, what do we do about it? I sometimes think of LMS as like a garage. It's like, we've got the garage now. Now we have to figure out what cars to park in it and how to use that garage well. And so that's kind of an exciting time. Yeah, so we have profs using it, and we want to really kind of have this now as an opportunity to seamlessly integrate other pedagogy enhancing technologies into our institution and into our local ecosystem. Yeah, now when it comes to skill development, I'm going to highlight this a little bit because it's really the world in which I live in as well. That becomes a question now. How can we use technology to kind of help us develop these skills in our students? And also, of course, anytime we're going to develop something in an institution, we'd like to be able to measure it. So can we measure these skills and develop these skills? That's going to be, I think, the big challenge for educational technology in general. And that's why it's sort of one that I'm so excited by. So just to unpack that a little bit, what do we mean when we say skills? Well, it can mean different things. In fact, in some cases, it means skills. Like in a nursing program or something, it could be suturing a wound. It could be, setting a broken bone well. So in some cases, we actually mean real sort of low-level physical skills. But we also include these higher-level skills, these sort of cognitive skills that the brain uses to think, learn, and reason, intrapersonal skills, so emotional intelligence and so-called metacognition, having a sense of your own knowledge and your own, cognitive behavior, and of course, interpersonal skills, which are critical to communication and interacting with other human beings, so the ability to collaborate, communicate, all these sorts of things. So yeah, the idea is if a student can think critically and creatively, if they have a good sense of their own strengths and weaknesses, and if they can communicate and collaborate well with others, those skills will help them in a world where, again, a lot of current jobs are going to disappear. And in fact, a lot of students, we know from a lot of the research that's done, work many different jobs, sometimes in very different contexts, before settling into a career, if they ever do. So these are the skills that can, help these kinds of students. But this is not a light challenge for universities to reach. If we think of skills, and yes, I'm sorry, I could not help but wave the Raptor flag a little bit. I am from Toronto. We're quite proud of our Toronto Raptors these days. So let me use that as an example, basketball. I like to use sports as a good example to just make a distinction between two kinds of things we try to do in university. And the first thing is to teach information, to give students information. Say, in my case, it's intro psych, so I want them to learn about psychology and the theories, the important figures, what the research suggests so far, etc. And we know when it comes to students learning information that it's relatively easy to impart information on another individual. If it can take only one exposure, if that exposure is sufficiently engaging. So if we have a really good lecture, a really good textbook, or some other kind of resource that makes some concept clear, then students can sometimes, with one exposure, obtain that information. They got it. Now, of course, if we have repeated exposures, then that's going to make the information sort of stronger and retained better. But relatively speaking, it's not that hard to teach information, and I think we do this very well at the higher ed world. I think our traditional system has been largely based on professors curating information and then passing on what they think is the relevant information to students. So that part, I think we're pretty strong. Where the challenge really lies is in these skills. So I will sometimes start by saying things this way. You can learn a lot about basketball in an hour. If you want to learn to play basketball, you're not going to do that in an hour. And you're not going to do it in a day or a week or a month. It's going to take a long time. You're going to start out not very good, but with repeated practice, especially structured practice, especially in a feedback-rich context, then the skill slowly gets better and better. Each time you practice, that skill again becomes more fluid, more natural, more ingrained in who you are. And so if we want to teach students to think critically or think creatively, we need to find ways of giving them repeated structured practice. So they have to engage these skills, they have to engage them repeatedly, and hopefully they engage them in a feedback-rich context. Now, I highlight this because I want you kind of thinking, well, how do we do that in our current educational institution? We have a lot of constraints on class time, on what we can do, and so how are we supposed to make this work? And this is, I think, a great example where I think technology can change the way we do things and help us with these challenges. So I think this is really a good example of where innovative educational technology is critical, because if we're going to give students a lot of practice, we're probably going to have to do this outside of the classroom, right? We usually use the classroom for lecturing. I mean, if it's a flipped classroom, you can kind of view a flipped classroom that way, that you are kind of giving them the repeated structured practice in the class in that flipped case. But you know, there's some people are flipping, but it's not like flipping is becoming a huge thing on every campus. It's something that happens a little bit. So in the non-flipped classrooms, if we're going to do the lecturing in the classroom, we have to do this practice outside of the classroom. So that suggests things like the assessments that we do, the active learning that students are going through. That seems to be the obvious place for skill learning. And so how are we going to manage that in a structured, good way? Well, that's the kind of thing technology is good at. So I think this is a major challenge to our environment and a major place where educational technologies can play a really big role. All right, so again, I've been a little vague, and I'm not going to spend very much time on this section, but I just want to give you a sense of how technology can fill this role. Okay, and I'm going to give you this sense from a peer assessment system I know well. Now, there's a number of peer assessment systems out there now. Peer Scholar is one of them, but a number of them can basically do the same sort of thing that I'm showing now. Not as good as Peer Scholar, obviously, but generally. So it really harnesses something called peer assessment. And peer assessment, in my view, is the most powerful pedagogical process for skill development. And so if that's the major challenge, at least for me, that's the first place we should be looking. And so let me just make this a little more concrete. It's usually a three-step process. So step one is very akin to the traditional things. Students are asked to produce some composition of some sort. Now, usually in the classroom, that would be a written composition. Because Peer Scholar's digital platform, it can be any kind of digital composition. So you could be asking them to submit videos or images or audio files or written text. So just imagine we ask students to submit some written composition in accord with some prompt that the professor gives and any resources, etc. So they all do that. All right, now here's where things get a little more interesting. And I want to stress here, you know, we talk about educational technology, and sometimes that gets a sort of magic sense to it. Well, there's nothing magic about technology. Technology is good at one thing, and that's logistics. It does logistics well. To the extent that there's magic, it's in the design of the technology. It's in the educational principles that underlie the logistics. And so you're going to see some complex logistics here in a sense, and that's where the technology is coming in handy. So step two. So students have all submitted something. In step two, they log into the system, and what they see is a subset of their peers' work. So in my case, just to be concrete, it's usually 6. So they see 6 of the compositions that their peers have submitted. They're presented anonymously, so they don't know whose work it is, and they're selected randomly from the class. And now what we ask students to do is to assess each of these compositions. Now, this assessment can be pretty complex. These systems allow you to create full assessment forms and stuff, but to simplify for now, just imagine we asked students to do one thing with each peer's work. Imagine we said, think of all the ways this work could be better. Then think of the one thing that if this person fixed, that would have the maximum impact on the quality of their work. Tell them what that thing is. Let's call it the weakness. So what's the current biggest weakness? And then give them some idea of how to improve that. Okay, and you're going to have to do that for 6 peers, right? So now let's imagine each one. For each peer now, you have to first engage in critical thought to find that weakness. You then have to engage in creative thought to figure out how it could be better, and then you engage in receptive communication to express this all to the peer. Okay, so that's a very structured practice with those skills. And then you do that again for peer 2, and for peer 3, and for peer 4. There's the repeated structured practice. And of course, the technology is simply managing all of this, the selection of peer work and walking through them one at a time. Okay, now while you do that for 6 peers, exercising all these skills in a structured way, other students are doing it to your work. And so in the final step, you get 6 pieces of feedback. What do we ask you to do with each of those pieces of feedback? We ask you to analyze them. We ask you to go through a very similar process again. We tell you, some of your peers really know what they're talking about. Some, not so much. So what you have to do, peer at a time, is analyze that feedback. And once again, we can guide them through that analysis any way we want. But once again, we'll do just a simple question. How much better do you think your work would be if you did what this peer suggested? And so again, to do that, now it's receptive communication. Now you're listening to what another peer says. You're thinking critically about it. You're thinking creatively about, if I actually changed my work that way, would it be better? And then you're making your decision. Yeah, I think it would be quite a bit better. So then you can answer that question. So you engage these skills, and then you have to do it for feedback 2, feedback 3, feedback 4, etc. Repeated structured practice. And then at the end, you're often given the chance to just fix your work, make it better in a formative way for final submission. So notice here, why I gave you this example is just to highlight that all of the intense, repeated, structured practice that's going on here is driven by the students. It's active learning. It's assessment as learning at its best. The faculty member, they simply define the issue at the beginning, and they will grade it at the end. But all of this is happening through the students, by the students. It's happening outside of the classroom, and the technology is managing all of this. And so this is just an example of how at least one technology can manage it. And if you're interested, by the way, I'll just mention quickly, if you actually ask students to apply a rubric to each other's work, if you ask them to quantify, say, how much critical thought they see, you can actually measure each student's skill level at a given point in time. That's another story, but I just want to highlight it to say that this is an example of how technology can both develop these skills by giving the structured practice, and it can even measure them. So it can meet some of these challenges. Okay, so there's your concrete example. And given this, so now I'm going to say, hey, why isn't everybody doing this? So, given we have this thing that can provide a solution to what at least I argue is the biggest challenge, this is why we're all over experiential learning, because it develops these skills in an authentic context. Given you can use it to develop virtually any skill, given that it's very evidence-based, I didn't highlight this, but a lot of the research we've done has shown that it really does enhance critical thought and enhances metacognitive awareness, and so we have a lot of evidence to back up what we claim it does, and it fits within the current constraints of the system. You hear about disruptive technologies. In education, I'm not sure that's a good thing. We're not very disruption tolerant in education. So what we want are technologies that can up our game with a minimum of disruption. And this kind of does that. So one would think, okay, this should be like easy to kind of get out there, to get part of our ecosystem, maybe not Peer Scholar itself, but these sort of peer assessment systems that do this. But it can be very challenging to do that. And so just to highlight some of the challenges and frustrations, step one is just being able to talk to the right people and show them the technology. And so for the right people in my world, that's often like directors of centers of teaching and learning and such. And I'm just hoping, hey, can I just talk to you about this? That can be a real challenge to get that discussion ever happening. When you do talk to those people, there's sort of 2 things that are on their mind quite often. One is this pedagogically sensible? Is the product itself a good product? But the second one is, will anybody use it? How do I convince faculty to use it? And this is a major question. They don't want to buy into something if it's not going to be widely used. I mention that because this is going to all feed into some of the issues we talk about. Even if they're satisfied on those two, then very typically the common response is, well, there's no central budget for this kind of thing anyway. Go talk to the departments or go talk to individual professors and get them using it first. I'm going to come back to that. And then in general, of course, educational systems are just pretty risk averse. And so change and doing things in a different way is always tricky in an educational system. So what I really want to focus most of the talk on today is there something about our structure of the ecosystem that is sort of making it so difficult to get good educational technologies in use? And might there be a better structure? And so we're going to go there. We're going to start talking about this optimal EdTech system. You notice I have right under there. I do not propose to say I am any form of expert on this. I am simply a little critter that's played a number of roles in this ecosystem, but I kind of see what I think might be a better way. And by the way, this better way may already be in practice at many of your institutions. But again, the hope, I know it's not in practice. I know aspects are not in practice at many institutions. So I wanted to just kind of throw this out there and see what people think about it. And I'm really interested in you guys' comments and thoughts. And so, cool. So we're going to start with this poll here. We have a little quick poll that popped up. You meet someone at an event who works in EdTech. How are you most likely to react? So imagine one of these little networking events. You saddle up to a table. There's this person. You say, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm in the EdTech industry. Which of these is most likely to be your response? You're going to ask them more about the technology and the problem it addresses. You're going to continue to chat with them, but stay clear of the topic of EdTech. Or you're going to act like you see a friend you need to talk to and walk away. There we go. Which of these options do you think best describes what your reaction would be in that context? And I think you should be able to vote. This polling part is new to me in GoToMeeting, so. Is anything happening? So I'm not exactly sure. Again, this is the new part. It's EdTech, right? Hey, this is the fun of EdTech. So we got something out there. So far, I'm not seeing anything, but I assume that's because people are voting, and at some point, Chris will hit some magic button, and we'll see some numbers. Or we won't. All right. I'm not seeing anything except screens changing a little bit every now and then. So hopefully everything's cool. I don't know. Chris, I think I'm just going to move on and see if numbers show up or something like that. All right, I'm going to do that. I don't know. So I don't know what the vote was or how it was, but this is the first issue I want to talk about anyway, and it's kind of a funny one. So being the kind of critter I am, yeah. Anybody else seeing polling results? I don't know. So John just asked that in the chat. I'm not sure what you guys are seeing as well. You are a quiet group so far, I have to say. I will go on. We'll have a couple more polls. We'll see if they work when we get to them. If not, I'll give you the sense of what the poll was about anyway, and you can map your votes onto it. What I was trying to get at there was your sense of approach or avoid. That, if you're in a situation and somebody is part of the EdTech world, and especially on the vendor side of the EdTech world, what is your basic reaction? Do you want to get as far away from that person as possible before they start trying to, dare I say, sell you on something, or are you potentially interested? So I play guitar. If this were me as a guitar player and I walked into a networking event and there was a table and somebody said, oh, I work at the Gibson Guitar Factory, that guy would be, or that woman would be lucky to get rid of me for the rest of the night, because I would want to know everything I could possibly know about their world. I would love to know what the latest guitars were like and what the latest innovations were like. That's how guitar players are, but I don't always find that's how people in the education world are. We don't necessarily see the EdTech vendors as people who are trying to create tools that could help us up our game. In fact, we often see them as people that are trying to sell us something, and of course they are. But in the rest of the world, you know, and hockey players, they buy the tools of their trade from people who are constantly trying to improve them. But it's sometimes different. So, you know, I just like to say, hey, these vendors, they don't carry any special germs. And they shouldn't be judged by the desire to pay for offering a service. So this is where I like to get a little controversial. I know all about open educational resources. I love open educational resources. I think they have a very important place in our ecosystem. But when it comes to fully functioning commercial edtech, especially edtechs around assessment, especially when security and privacy and accessibility and all those things are critical, those technologies have to be built properly, which means by professionals. And professionals deserve to be paid. We're all paid for our teaching. And so if we want that product to continue to evolve, if we want it to be supported, etc., we should really see these edtech vendors as you know, people that will provide all that to us. Yes, for a cost, and that's how it works in the world. And so, you know, I think we need to have less of an us and them and more of an us, and a big us. So you'll see this kind of permeate through here a little bit. I think from the institutional side, we should be finding ways of allowing people to pitch to us formally. Nobody likes these cold calls, right? Nobody likes making the cold calls. Nobody likes getting the cold calls. We could have a much more structured way of inviting vendors to pitch their products and ideas to us. And somebody in our organization should be paying attention to these pitches. They should be plugged into the latest technology and stuff. And yes, we get a hit of this at conferences and such, but I'm suggesting a more formal way where a vendor might come to our website where it says, tell us what you got. And by the way, here are the things we're especially interested in knowing about your product. So tell us about these things. And if we're interested, then we may reach out to you for a demo or something like that. But invite them, welcome them to the world, see them as potentially offering value, and respond to them with that sort of respectful way. Okay. If we have other vehicles that we could use to support that, so much the better. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. I'm part of something called 1HE now. I don't know how many of you guys know about 1HE. It's kind of a LinkedIn for the higher ed world. So I'm one of their consultants. When we were talking about what we needed in 1HE, we said we want a section where edtech companies can pitch their products, where they can literally, you know, say, this is what we got, here's the problems we're trying to solve, and where other members of the community can then comment and react to them. So that if you're looking for technologies, you could go to that page as a one-stop shopping and get a lot of information. Of course, Campus Consortium is also trying to do exactly this, right? Making people aware of some of the issues in the technology world. So those sorts of vehicles also, I think we need to do a better job sort of attending to and integrating into our ecosystem. So that's kind of step one, is the EdTech world. All right. Now I want to talk about procurement a little bit. So, you know, I'm suggesting that we should be being very clear with vendors about what we want in their EdTech. I actually think the way we procure EdTech can shape the way vendors behave and the technologies they even create and bring to us. And so I think we have to see the power of the market. We are the market, and we have a lot of power to do things. So, for example, this seems to be the current approach, at least at a lot of campuses. We buy some technology if enough professors become convinced that that technology is valuable to them. So the current message sometimes given to vendors is talk to the profs. If you can get a bunch of profs using your technology, and if they get excited about it and they bring it to us, at that point we might start to get you know, a little interested, and we might take this to a higher level. I don't really like this approach, and I don't like it for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to highlight One now and one in a bit. So one now, what's the first big technology? Well, it's our learning management system. And at University of Toronto, it's Canvas. Okay, great. Canvas is great. It's more of a way to provide stuff like an archive of information for students. It's not that pedagogical, but again, it's the garage. It's what we need to start the process. But what if I had to ask you guys all, what is the next biggest purchase your campus has made with respect to something that we might call an educational technology? I suspect for most of you, the answer is this one: Turnitin. Now, I don't want to jump on Turnitin. I mean, Turnitin is a valuable service, right? It's helping us detect plagiarism and enhance academic integrity. And that's important. But I would venture to say, if I asked you, of the 10 things you hope our students leave our university with, sort of 10, skills or abilities that they didn't have, where would you rank can cite properly, or even, does not plagiarize? Would that be in the top 5? Does Turnitin deserve to be the second most purchased educational technology after LMSs? I think not, and I think the reason it's there is because professors like to be able to prevent the cheating that's going on in their class. So it was attractive to the professor, and therefore the professors started using it, and it went central. Is it having a big impact on student learning? It's having some impact on student learning, but if we could develop their critical thinking, their creative thinking, their communication skills, in my mind, those are a whole lot more important. So I think we need to rethink procurement a little bit. There's so many questions we can ask with a technology. Is it secure? Is the price reasonable? Will professors use it? Is it accessible? Is it sufficiently supported? Does the pedagogy align with our mission? Is it inclusive, etc.? Of these, what are the things that we consider the most important? And so I would argue that we have been in a world for a while where will professors use it has been the #1 driving force, where I would like to argue that does the pedagogy align with our mission should be the driving force. I think we need to reprioritize our procurement and our whole process to procurement. So specifically, what I'm suggesting is that we have what I would call a success-focused procurement, something that's more top-down versus bottom-up. So we all have, here's the University of Toronto, we all have some notion about our mission, right? What we want to do for students, what we're engaging to do. So the university will strive to ensure that its graduates are educated in the broadest sense of the term, with the ability to think clearly, judge objectively, and contribute constructively to society. Okay, very cool. I love to think clearly, judge objectively, that's problem solving, contribute constructively, that suggests collaboration, communication. So I love all of that. I noticed that academic integrity and plagiarism aren't on that list, so be it, cool. But this should be now our outreach to vendors. We should say, this is what we do. This is what this is our mission, is to give our graduates this sort of education that helps them think clearly, judge objectively, and contribute constructively to society. So if you want us to use your product, tell us how it helps us do this better. Okay, so a very rational, very structured, very top-down, very goal, mission-driven approach. And so we'll ask questions to vendors like this. How will adopting your technology help us better reach this mission? And do you have any evidence to support that? It's very easy for a company to say, oh, it enhances engagement in the classroom. Okay, well, that's nice. Now unpack that. How is it actually going to result in better thinking, better judgment, etc.? And yeah, is this just something you're telling us? Is it at least based on research findings? Has your technology itself been subjected to direct research? How strong is the evidence base? So I think these should be very powerful. And of course, what we could combine with this top-down is the idea that eventually we may be moving towards a toolbox of educational technologies. And so we can be careful, if we have this top-down rational approach, to make sure we have minimally overlapping technologies, different technologies that help us up our game in different ways that complement each other. Yeah, and so, you know, rather than just having, well, this prof likes this one and this prof likes this one, so we have this and we have this and we have this, I think we need to get a little more structured in our procurement. I want to use this to bring up an issue that I think others in the ecosystem might not be sensitive to if they haven't spent any time on the vendor side. And I'm kind of bringing back the Campus Consortium's mission here. I want to start at that second paragraph. Their mission is to help members reduce the time, cost, and effort associated with implementing IT services, etc. This is a good thing, right? If we can reduce costs on campus, that's good for our students, that's good for everybody. We don't want to be paying too much for stuff. I'm going to bring that in a couple ways, but let me give you this distinction. Here are 3 companies I know well because I've kind of worked with them all in different ways. Pearson's my textbook company, and we use their Rebel product as well in my course. They're a very big company. They're a huge company, right? Top Hat is sort of a smaller ed tech, but they're still pretty big. They're certainly big relative to us, for example. So Top Hat produces the technology I use for response system in the classroom. And then there's the company I'm part of, which has like, you know, 5 of us that do our thing with Pure Scholar. Now, when you look at this sort of continuum of a very large company to a smaller company, or what I'm going to call a heavy company to a lighter company, we can ask who we want to be dealing with in universities. Do we only want the heavy companies? Now, what do I mean by heavy? What I mean is that they have things like sales representatives. They have so many of them that they can send them into universities knocking on professors' doors. Why would they do that? Well, because professors seem to be the doorway to get to a university now. And so if that's the approach, so if we kind of tie that back to that previous slide where, you know, if a university says, if you want us to use your technology, you have to have some profs use it first. Well, if that's the way you're going to do things, then it's going to be really hard for the small companies. You're going to need the army of people calling or knocking on profs' doors, the cold calls, in order to penetrate in that way. And that means the university is basically saying, we only want to deal with these huge companies that, by the way, charge a heck of a lot for their product because, well, they have huge staff in order to penetrate our market. And that's their approach. A place like Top Hat, a little less so. Right, a little less so, but still they have a room full of salespeople who are calling professors on the phone. They're still connecting with professors, and so they're somewhere in the middle. They're able to offer something a little cheaper than, say, a Pearson because they're a little smaller. Then you have the really small companies. The really small companies cannot play that game of knocking on doors, not without becoming big companies and the product becoming expensive. So one of the claims I'm going to make is we don't want to close the door to the small companies. If we could have them, if we could make sure the ecosystem is one where they can play, then they're often where the real innovative ideas are. They're the faster moving, nimble companies, and I think we want them in our ecosystem. And I'm not sure where the sweet spot is. You don't want such a fly-by-night company that's going to disappear tomorrow. But my claim is we would like an ecosystem where companies of many different sizes could play and bring their you know, sort of ideas and innovations to it. So with that kind of in mind, that's one of the reasons I don't like the convince a prof first approach, right? But with that in mind now, what I want to suggest is an important step to that is getting our stuff together, centralizing the purchase. So this goes a little bit with the procurement and being rational, right? But it's a little different too. So a lot of places have a decentralized. So we've been told this many times. Talk to all of the department chairs. They all have budgets. We don't have a central budget. So you have to go and talk to all these chairs. So problem number one, you know, that kind of gets down here, you need a lot of people to do this. This requires a heavy company in order to manage all of these relationships that you're trying to do. So first of all, you're cutting some potentially out of the game altogether, or at least pushing them into a direction of growth that means more expensive products for everybody. So do we really want to do that? And that's what a decentralized thing does. You get duplication of relationships. Sometimes the same software is being sold to 4 different departments when it could be central and cheaper that way. No systematic approach to procurement. Everybody's doing their own thing. And critically, probably no central support. If every department is using their own peer assessment system, and and there's 4 different peer assessment systems on campus, then every department has to figure out how to support the one they use, etc. So much better if we could do it centralized. We could get rid of the duplication, thereby reducing costs. Support could be a heck of a lot easier. First of all, we have this rational approach to procurement. Then we decide, like I say, this complementary toolbox of things, and then we provide institutional support. We train our institutional support people on those technologies. We have websites for those technologies. We have use cases for those technologies. We have webinars, we have guest speakers, etc. And so we can really do a better job scaling use because we're supporting use a lot better, and it allows these lighter, smaller companies into the game. So, this is one of the things that frustrates me the most when I talk to people and they say, we love Peer Scholar and we're convinced it can scale, but we just don't have a central budget. So it won't work. It's like, really, that's going to derail everything. And so I think we're starting to shift this way. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest is we need to shift this way. This is very important, in my opinion, to getting the most out of EdTech. All right. And I also want to suggest something else. So the traditional kind of way of paying for EdTech has been one where, okay, enough professors have tried it and liked it. So originally, when the professors are trying it, how is it being paid for? Well, either a department is picking up the costs for that professor, or the students are being asked to pay for it. That's really, there's no central support for it, so that must be where it comes from. But then the idea is if you get enough people, again, think Turnitin, you get enough professors using it, then you go for a full institutional license where they charge you some amount per registered student. So for me, in a sort of joking way, that's from like going from smiling at somebody to asking them for marriage. It's just a little too much of a jump. And I think something is lost in that jump. I think that flirtation period, oh my goodness, this analogy is going to go too far, I can tell. But I think that flirtation period is highly important if used right. And so let me suggest what the approach that I like and that I would like to see us insist on from vendors. This is what we should say. This is how we do business. If you want to do business with us, this is how we do business. So when somebody learns about some educational technology, has vetted them, thinks this is cool, this fits with our mission, it's something we might add to our toolbox, I think they should then say, okay, here's what we want. First year, we want it at low cost, a reasonable cost, something that respects the time and effort you have to take. But we're going to bring it into the system. We're going to bring it into our ecosystem. And then together, and you're going to hear this a lot, together we will all try to get it used in our ecosystem, get it out there, and we're going to look at what the internal traction is. And so that will be the real purpose of the first year. And if you want this to continue past the first year, we're going to need your help getting it sort of entrenched in our system. So this is the idea here, is to make sure the vendor stays connected. It's not just about the product anymore. It's going to be a little more, as you see. Once we get by that first year, then I still don't think we should go to the full institutional. I think we should say, okay, we're getting some traction. So now let's pay for use as the traction increases. And so obviously we're insisting now that you have some sort of administrative interface where you can see usage, which you should insist on being able to see, and that together you work out some plan that, until usage is a certain height. Once we get usage up to a certain height, then we're going to go full institutional. But until that time, we're going to have some cost strategy that increases with usage. Why is this relevant? Because once again now, we're telling the vendor, you've got a reason to stay in the game. If we go right to here, they've won. They're at the end point. But if we have this little flirtation period here, then we're going to really support a partnership. And that's what I'm going to suggest, is a real partnership between vendors and institutions. And I think this sort of three-step approach kind of promotes that. So I'm a big fan of that. All right. And so here's the real partnering kind of story. And so really, I'm just going to throw these up really quickly. The vendor should be helping you internally scale. So they should be providing web content for your websites. They should be providing webinars if they've done webinars on how to use the tool in various cases, or the merits of the tool, or the pedagogy behind the tool. If they haven't done those webinars, they should. These should be things you can use to internally promote this product that you're piloting for a year. They should be showing use cases, wow, there's no S there, sorry about that. Various ways that others are using this tool to reach certain results. They should be giving you promotional materials, etc. And for your part, on the institutional side, you should be pushing all these to the faculty members and doing what you can to make sure these are getting out there. I also think the vendor should provide an up-to-date and powerful train-the-trainer experience to educate your faculty IT people. We have these faculty IT people. We don't want to duplicate support. We have great support individuals within our campuses. Let's make sure, though, that those support individuals understand the technologies, understand the pedagogical aspects, the kind of learning they promote, and then obviously understand the technical side of them as well. And so if they do that, now we've got this group that becomes the bridge. They are really now the bridge between the vendor and the institution. They become a very powerful way of information flowing back and forth, and to maintain that relationship. They are really the sort of where the rubber hits the road on the relationship. And obviously, both sides should be able to monitor progress, and both sides should be checking in. You should say every 2 or 3 months, let's check in, let's see where usage is, let's see if there's anything else we can do. And so this is the period, of course, during that first year when the vendor's trying to prove the value of their product, and part of that value is that other people will try it and they will continue to use it. So they're going to try to prove that. This should also be happening throughout that scaling period that I described. And then once you get up to a certain usage, then you say, okay, now it's a core part of our ecosystem and things are cool. Yeah. All right. So here in a nutshell are my recommendations. Respect the vendors, adopt a centralized approach, focus adoption on our mission, allow these smaller vendors to be in the game, structure the deal in a way that motivates a partnering relationship, expect your vendor to help you reach your usage goals. They are not just about providing a product, they are also about supporting scaled use of that product, and commit to do your part too. Make it a real relationship. And those first few years of the relationship should be critical. All right, cool. Those are my, I almost want to leave that on for a second. Those are my suggestions of how we could have an ecosystem that I think would really allow us to adopt the best educational technologies, support them properly, get them used, and allow them to have the impact they can have to do things like, for example, develop skills in our students, the kinds of skills that give them future success. We had another poll here. I think we're a little tight on time. Let me just say, well, okay, let's try it. Let's see, poll in progress for attendees on, so this is the first time I've seen this little message. So maybe it is in progress here. Quick question for you. This is more for me. I'm curious what you thought of all this. Is there anything new here? Did you find it interesting and inspiring, or is it like, yeah, we knew all this? I would love to know. So if you don't mind picking one of those options, and I don't know, I think Chris has control of this, so I guess I'll just hang for a minute. But that's the crux of the talk. My last slide after this is simply a thank you slide and a little bit of information of how you can connect with me if you'd like, including finding me on LinkedIn or 1HE, and I'll have an email address in the way. So I don't know, Chris, if answers are going to pop up or something, or if you, I feel I have no locus of control. Sorry, old psychology term there. It's now an external locus of control. It's up to Chris. So something just happened. Something happened, but I don't see any results. All right. Oh, there's the results. A couple of ideas were novel and got me thinking. That seems to be and I got some bang-ons, a quarter of you. Woohoo! Excellent. Well, that's cool. I'm glad. Thank you very much. That's impressive. I appreciate that. There's the contact information. I think I'm going to turn things over to John now. If there's questions, I will make John the presenter right now. There you go, John.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today and for staying on with us for a great presentation from Steve, showing us some insight into the EdTech ecosystem of the future. I wanted just to say, I think we're running out of time to take the questions. We do have a few that have come in. What I'd like to do is write these up with Steve's responses and send them out to all of our attendees today in a follow-up email, which we'll be sending shortly, as well as sending you a recording of this session and the slides. I do want to just remind everyone of some of the open grants that Campus Consortium currently has open. You can visit us at campusconsortium.com to see some of these EdTech grants that are open. We have them running through today and into the summer, so please check those out. And join us for our next EdTalk, where we will be covering an important topic related to campus safety on college campuses today. That will be coming up next month. Again, want to sincerely thank our presenter, Steve Joordens, today from the University of Toronto. Great conversation and a great presentation, and really appreciate everyone's attention and interest in the topic. And we look forward to being with you all once again. Steve, thanks again. And this is Campus Consortium signing off.